Alright, these are Chapter 9 notes. We're going to do a quick review over some of the slides we've done over the past week, so you can hopefully get some help if you're doing this outside class. Alright, every chapter we do, we always try to relate it to some problems or things that help us understand why energy and the body is important. Today we have these 3 problems. You should have these in your notes if you don't yet. So each problem, 1, 2, and 3, we do need to write down. Alright, you can skip the next slide. The Pushup Lab, hopefully you have done. If not, you can see me later about it. Moving forward, these are all notes. These first ones about the Pushup Lab, just to help you. And this is the beginning of the Chapter 1 notes, after the 3 problems that focus our chapter. Here, your job is to look at all 4 photos, photo A, B, C, and D, and you're creating a hypothesis that explains how they all have something in common, or what do they show. So you would have in your notes, you would title it Chapter 9, and you would write hypothesis equals all blank, so whatever you want to call these 4 things, whatever you want to call them, and show, what do they all show? What's something in common they have? Something that they, if you were to compare them, they have in common. Alright, the next page is, you basically need to print this, and you need to have it in your Chapter Notes 9 pocket. In order to fill this task out, it starts with the problem. We write some observations. In order to complete this, you would use this link right here. And you just right-click it if you're using a PC. And you can just open hyperlink. It'll take you to that page. And then you watch the simulation. You get your observations, develop a hypothesis, and then down here is where what we call the statement of understanding. And so this assignment I generally just call SOU, or a statement of understanding. Down below here is where you say whether or not your observations help answer this question, and whether or not your observations support your hypothesis or reject your hypothesis. Again, whatever you come up with your hypothesis doesn't matter. You just have to be able to say down here if your observation supported it or did not support it. Simple as that. If you're going to print a worksheet off, use the next slide, which is slide 12, because it's blank. It doesn't have any more overlying text on it or the URL. So use this one if you're printing it, and again, you put it in your Chapter 9 notes. In order to complete it, you use this URL. Alright, next slide, we have a definition you need to copy down in your notes. And to complete task 1, all you need to do is look at image B. Image B is this one right here that compares ATP in a high energy state and a low energy. You compare the high energy and the low energy state, and your goal is to compare them and find out what's different between the high and low energy state. And then you explain. So you just observe it and come up with a statement or an observation that says how they're different. Number 2, you look at image A. Image A is in this box, and it looks a bit like a cycle, and you can see part of this cycle is the ATP, or triphosphate. You have something that looks like energy, either being released or absorbed. You decide. Then you have this. You have ADP and a separate phosphate. Now, they've somehow separated, but if you keep going, it shows this word energy here. So either energy is being absorbed or released. You decide which you think it is in order to have this again, to once again make an ATP. So it shows the cycle. But how would you describe this in words? So as you look at this, how would you describe it? And lastly, just based on what we've studied so far, use it, and this would help too. Use this YouTube video, watch the YouTube video, and connect it to this idea of high and low energy ATP, and connect it to this idea that ATP is an energy molecule. What do you think it's doing for the muscle cells? Because our muscles need energy. What do you think ATP does to help energize the muscles? Watching this video will help. This YouTube link. Please do. And again, all of these responses need to be recorded, as well as the definition in your Chapter 9 notes. Alright, next slide. Here we have our problems again. It's just reminding you of those problems. You don't have to rewrite them, so please don't. It's just reminding us of why Chapter 9 is important to us. We want to understand how people maintain healthy weight. What decides when people look fit? What does it mean to be fit? How do our bodies make and use energy? And what kind of diet and exercise supports student athletes? These are the focus problems of this chapter for us. We have some visual graphics, nothing to do there. Here, if you want to use your textbook, it's page 238. If you want a little more zoomed in, you can see it on the next slide here, which is slide 18. And your responsibility is to decide, why does our body store fat rather than carbohydrates? In fact, when you eat carbohydrates, any extra carbohydrates you have get turned into lipids or fats and stored in the body. So why wouldn't the body just store the carbs when they're there? Why would it turn them into lipids? And what you need to do is you need to read these three facts, fact A, B, and C. And these facts will help you understand how to answer 1 and 2 below. So in the notes, I'm looking for you answering 1 and 2, and you answer 1 and 2 by reading the information found in A, B, and C. Good luck. All right, slide 20. In order to answer questions 1 through 3, you must go to PhET. So you copy this link, you go to PhET, and this specific simulation shows you it should look like this. This is a still screenshot of it. But you want to say you want to summarize the interactions of 2 atoms. So in the simulation, you'll play with these 2 atoms. All right, so we have 2 atoms here. Your job is to play with this and see how the atoms interact, and also relate it to this graph right here. This graph will show you how potential energy builds or reduces the higher the line, the higher the particle goes, or the closer they get, you can see something happens with potential energy. So you should summarize that finding. And also you should summarize just how they interact together. Are they attracted? Are they not? If you pull them apart, what happens? Yada yada. If you want to add the forces, this can help you understand some of what goes on. You can see they are pulled to one another, but when they get close, you can see the arrows push in the other direction. So those arrows tell you which direction of force is happening, pulled or pushed. Alright, again, use the simulation to complete these 3 questions, a lot of which is just you summarizing your ideas or what you observed. And the third one is just come up with 3 brainstormed ideas or examples in the real world of a moving object producing a high force or energy. Alright, the next slide goes on to use another PhET simulation, and so I'll go ahead and open that up for you now. Alright, the idea is we need to relate the idea that when molecules collide, energy is absorbed between those. So anytime things collide, it causes some kind of collision and energy is involved. We're focusing on what happens to bonds, what happens to energy when they collide. We want to study what those things look like. So we have a simulation we're going to pull up. The idea, though, is ultimately we want to relate it to ATP. So if we go back to slide 13, just to relate, we know that with low energy, this particle comes and separates from the ADP. And if we watch this video, this would show us that with ATP, when it releases this phosphate, it shoots off. It has speed to it. It's moving. It has some kinetic energy. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move to a slide and try to relate what's going on with ATP to how it might be able to energize something. So let's look at it here. So if we do mini collisions, you can pump in particles, as I'm doing here, and pumping in these. In its current state, this is the reaction. So the idea is if these combine in the right way, it will lead to some kind of chemical reaction, which is what the arrow means. Notice it can go either way. These can react to create these, or these can react to make these. Right now, all we have is B and C bonded and A's together. Notice this one thing. If you watch it long enough, when they're moving slow, not much is going on. But watch as I add energy. What we need to do is relate energy to what the particles do. So as we provide heat to the box, the particles now, you can see something's happening. You should also look at these. These numbers right here tell you the current amounts of which particles exist. And if we paused it, even though they're moving fast, we pause the reaction, we'd see that right now we should find in the box 9 A's by themselves, which is what it started out as. But before, all we had was A's and B's bonded to C's. But right now it's saying that we have 1 AB. That means something happened. As we provide more energy to the box again in the form of heat, we should find a change of something. So as we pause it now, we're getting different numbers. We have more ABs, so that means these did something together to form this. Your job now is to take our findings here and answer these questions. So it says, interpret what is the chemical reaction or molecules formed from the collision. So this is the reaction, and what did we do? We made them collide. So if you can talk about collisions and how it resulted in this reaction here. Next question is, interpret the reaction. So what have you found about collisions and chemical reactions happening? Again, a reaction happens anytime bonds are changed. So anytime atoms exchange bonds, bonds are broken, or bonds are formed, that means a reaction occurred. All right, we have the final question on this task is observe simulation. And you want to summarize, so based on what you saw from that little simulation we did, what's the relationship, or how are things connected, this idea of energy and collisions and reactions? This idea of reactions are forming new molecules, changing bonds, breaking or adding new ones, right? So what's the relationship between energy of collisions and chemical reactions? So you just summarize your results here. All right, this YouTube video right here ties in with this concept. I'd recommend you watching it for additional support. Next shows that when a phosphate disconnects or shoots off from the original ATP, so this guy right here, when this one separates, when this phosphate molecule separates from the ATP, energy is apparently produced. And this picture shows ATP releasing a phosphate, just like in this picture, but it also relates it to the body. And you can see there's some muscle flexing here. So the idea is you can watch these videos to add extra support and understanding to the concept and the questions on this slide. You can watch these. These are all links to help you answer these questions, but you also could just use these pictures. It's up to you. Depends on how well you understand it. It says connect the ideas of a phosphate molecule altering a protein or molecules of the body. So you look at this picture and then summarize how ATP, lastly this summarize how ATP interacts with other molecules to produce movement. This arm is moving, and you have ATP involved in the muscle moving. So you would summarize, what do you understand from this picture that shows how ATP is helping this move, the muscles move? Good luck. And again, these videos all will help you. These videos often animate this process so you can understand it better. Next slide. That's Drake. Don't worry about it. All right, this is a homework assignment. I'll leave it to you to do that task. And if you still haven't done it, let me know. Moving forward, this slide, so if you don't have this in your notes yet, this is a task we need to do. We need to graph what we see here. And this is an example of peas, like the vegetable peas in a tube, and the white is air, and the water is the blue. And this whole task is about measuring how much oxygen are the peas breathing in. And that is in general, this idea of respiration is when organisms breathe in oxygen to make energy for themselves, or to use energy, I should say. So you're going to graph this first amount. So you got to decide what is the number of the oxygen level at 0 minutes. So your data collecting would be at 0 minutes, the oxygen level is at this amount. So you got to figure out what is that amount. And the amount is in milliliters, so it's milliliters of oxygen. So what number milliliters of oxygen is there? And then at 10 minutes equals what amount of milliliters of oxygen? At this point, the bubble is shrinking because after 10 minutes, the peas have been breathing. So your idea is to graph it, and what does that look like? So you need to figure out, what are you going to label your x-axis? Is your x-axis going to be time, or is it going to be the milliliters of oxygen consumed? And then what you have to do is create a scale for the y and x-axis. This is the scale. It's an example. This isn't for the peas, but it's an example for cars, car cost. And you can see here's an example of the scale for the speed of a car. Again, so you have to label. This would be the label of an x-axis, a label of label of the y-axis, label of the x, and then you have to give a scale for it. And there's two ways you can graph it. Some students do a bar graph to represent 0 and 10 and the amount of oxygen for each time.